Here's something many people don't realize. You don't need an Investec private bank account to save with Investec. Their personal cash investments are available from 100,000 Rand and designed for capital preservation. In markets like these, having a low-risk cash component alongside equities is simply sensible, particularly if you're over 55.
Good morning. This is Biz News Daybreak. I'm Assassination. Coming up, the latest from global markets, a stock view on the collapse of property values and middle-class wealth, why municipal rates may be rising regardless of what your property is worth, a closer look at how employment equity is affecting police recruitment, and a controversial take on the motives behind one of South Africa's most significant political assassinations. We begin with the global picture. There's been the usual movement across global markets overnight, with investors still watching geopolitics and energy closely. Here are the news updates from our partners at Bloomberg.
The U.S. and Iran failed to strike a peace deal over the weekend, and in response, President Trump said the U.S. will begin a full naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz beginning Monday. Here is Trump speaking tonight to reporters.
We have a lot of people, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil, and that will be very effective. But what we want to do is we want to, and again, we don't need it. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait.
That was President Trump speaking to reporters at Joint Base Andrews. Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting countries in the Mideast are racing to bring the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table. And they are also talking with the U.S. to get an extension of a fragile 2-week ceasefire announced last Tuesday. However, tonight, President Trump told reporters he doesn't care if the Iranians return to the table for negotiations. Now, a full naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is being viewed by markets as a re-escalation. At the end of last week, markets began to price in a peace dividend, but now, in Asian trading, oil prices are rallying, and a key question is whether this is the beginning of a true supply disruption. Amrita Sen is founder and director of Market Intelligence.
This is fundamentally the issue, right? Yes, the US is the biggest producer in the world, and we are not expecting shortages outside of maybe the West Coast. But US policymakers have to appreciate this is a global market, and this kind of a blockade does mean high domestic prices.
That is Amrita Sen, founder and director of Market Intelligence, speaking earlier to Bloomberg this weekend. The International Monetary Fund says global prices will take time to come down even after the war ends. More from Bloomberg's Monica Ricks.
Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says the IMF plans to lower its global growth forecast as a result of this war.
We are going to have a downgrade, and the size of this downgrade will depend on these two things: duration and speed with which everything can come back to the same level of production that we had before.
Georgieva on CBS's Face the Nation. She says some countries are also experiencing higher degrees of disruption, but there is common ground.
Everybody feels the pinch of prices going up.
Her comments come ahead of this week's spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank. Monica Ricks, Bloomberg Radio.
Wall Street's biggest banks are set to report earnings this week, beginning with Goldman Sachs on Monday. Herman Chan is a senior analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence. He says it's been a tough quarter for U.S. banks. However, the economy has been resilient.
We're still seeing a lot of GDP growth still chugging along, but there is going to be the question, are the higher energy prices going to create some cracks in the consumer side?
That is Bloomberg analyst Herman Chan on Bloomberg this weekend. Bank shares are off to their worst start to a year since the regional banking crisis of 2023. The KBW Bank Index fell 6% in the first quarter.
Back home, the conversation turns to something less visible but potentially more damaging over time. Magnus Heystek, investment strategist and founder of Brenthurst Wealth, argues that South Africa has already seen a significant destruction of middle-class wealth, particularly through the collapse of property values in parts of the country. His view is that this isn't just about market cycles, It's about the long-term deterioration of cities and towns and what that does to balance sheets. Here's Heystek.
So I think Helena's up against it. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I can stand here 5 years from now, but I've seen Daybreak just collapse: the roads, the robots, the hawkers, the beggars, the crime, the mafia, the taxi mafia. I mean, and not only that, my biggest fear for me and my family is being stopped by the SAPS on the road or the roadblock. That's my biggest fear in life. I can protect myself in my house or in my building, but when you're driving a car and these buggers jump out of the bushes and you're driving by yourself, there's a very good chance that you're going to have to pay a bribe to get out of whatever case they have against you. So that's my biggest fear. And do you want to live there? Well, people in South Africa have made their choice over the last 10 to 15 years. The migration from the north, not only from Johannesburg, the migration from the north, as those towns collapsed, the Kimberleys, the Bloemfonteins, the Bloemhofs, the Womberanstads, the Bethels. Now, I used to drive around these areas visiting clients. I saw this with my own eyes. And this is the biggest financial collapse in South Africa that nobody's talking about. All those properties, whether it's residential or commercial, used to have a value, used to belong to someone. It was in someone's balance sheet. I have a house or two, a building, a garage. That's gone. Zero. It's worthless. The banks moved out, the Pam Goldings moved out, and you have the debt collectors move in. Those towns have gone, and nobody talks about that destruction of middle-class wealth. We see it in Joburg. I live in Joburg. I love Joburg. But my house, in real terms, has not gone up 1 cent in 20 years. Let me repeat. In inflation-adjusted terms, I will be lucky if I get the same price that I could get 20 years. And if I talk to my clients in that, they're all in the same boat. They'll all tell you the same thing. My house is worth bugger all. I cannot sell it. I cannot give it away. As opposed to Hermanus, I mean, this is just a bubble. It's a fantastic bubble with great restaurants. You know, someone has just paid 105 million rand for Marcus Jooster's house. In Johannesburg, you can buy a whole suburb for that price. So let's make a note of Helen Zille. I'll support her. I'm registering. I'm voting. But my golly, she's up against it.
Staying with property, there's another pressure point. Roy Tilley, a property analyst, explains why municipal rates may continue to rise even when property values are falling. At the center of it is the formula used to calculate rates, which compounds over time and can disconnect entirely from the underlying value of the asset. Take a listen.
The biggest problem that you have is that everybody initially doesn't see the real problem. They just say, oh, well, you've got a problem. You can object to your rates, but the objection process is only focused on the municipal value, which is deeply flawed, and that over time, based on their stupid formula, the connection between the property value and your rates goes way out. In fact, it has no relevance eventually. And in my particular model, if you compound the randage at 6% a year, and your rates will still go up regardless of if your property goes up. Your property doesn't even have to go up. And then if you want to stop the rates going up, you actually have to apply minus 21% to the value of your property every 4 years just to stop the rates going up. That's the absurdity of this particular formula.
So in essence, your property needs to devalue by 21% for those rates not to rise, or to even just stabilize.
Yeah, to stabilize your rate book going forward, you need minus 21%. That's at a 6% compound of the randage. But if they compound it at 7 or 8%, because they get more greedy and mismanage the funds more in these municipalities, then it'll be worse. You need more like minus 25, minus 26. It's a very simple Excel model that I built, but it's really been exposed in KZN now, because we've got such a bad municipality. Because Johannesburg, they say, is not good, not run well, but it's run a lot better than KZN, because the randage, say, on an industrial property is 2.5 cents in Johannesburg and 5 cents here.
And could you just explain randage in simpler terms?
Randage is just a fancy name for the percentage applied to the municipal value of your property. That's all randage is. So if they talk about 5 cents in the rand, it's 5% of the value of your municipal value of your property. 5% times your municipal value. And all other municipalities have a much lower sort of randage or percentage applied to them. But they're all going to have the same problem ultimately, because over time the compounding occurs and you'll creep up. Like, for example, in Durban, we had 1.5 cents in the rand, okay, on residential property. But over time, that'll creep up to 2.5, 3, because there's no limit on it. And eventually they'll be in the same position as people with industrial property. So we just happen to be on the front line here.
From property to policy. John Endries, CEO of the Institute of Race Relations, looks at how employment equity policies are playing out inside the police service. His argument is that in practice, the system is limiting career progression for tens of thousands of officers, including a significant number of black men, which raises broader questions about recruitment, morale, and effectiveness.
I think we also sometimes overestimate how well sophisticated audiences understand the impact of certain pieces of legislation or policy. And there's a great example that came out of research by Gabriel Krause, who's an IR fellow and leads the IR Legal, which is our legal division. And he looked at the police's employment data. And we've heard from Ian Cameron, we've heard from Rory Steyn. There's about 180,000 people working in the police. Out of those 180,000 people, 60,000 are in positions where they cannot be promoted because of their race and gender. Out of those 60,000 who cannot be promoted because of their race and gender, about 36,000 are black men. So now we tend to think of BEE as an anti-white policy, which is what gets Elon Musk all worked up, and President Trump as well. But in the police service, the group most affected by BEE and employment equity in this case, is black men. So how does this work? Imagine that you're at sort of seniority level 8 in the police service, and you're hoping to get promoted to level 9, one level up. But there's an overrepresentation of your race and gender at that level. That means you cannot be appointed to that level, usually. And the people most affected by that are black men. And the consequence of this is that, imagine that you're a young black man saying, I want to join the police force, and I'm going to map out a career for myself like Rory did, and rise to the top because I care about law enforcement. I want to fight crime. I want to bring my talent to this task, to this job, to this mission. But then you look at this employment chart and you see, okay, I get in at level 1. I won't be able to get to level 2 because there's an overrepresentation of black men. Even if I somehow make it, I can't get to level 3 because there's an overrepresentation. I can't get to 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 because there's an overrepresentation. And then, how do you recruit? How must the police attract the best people if they're saying, if you're a black man, don't bother applying at the lower levels. There's no space for you to progress up the ranks. At the top management level, just to add to your outrage, which I think you are beginning to build up, at the top management level, there's a target number for each of the 8 race gender pairs. So those 8 pairs are black, white, colored Indian, male, female. So 4 times 2, 8 race gender pairs. If you are a colored woman or a white woman, the target for you is 0. And this means that if you imagine, a colored girl somewhere who's highly talented, with great integrity, a great moral sense, wants to fight crime, studies all the literature, all the books, goes through university with the highest marks, goes overseas to become the best cop that you've ever seen.
And finally, a more historical and controversial perspective. Chris Nicholson, former judge of the KwaZulu-Natal High Court, reflects on the assassination of Chris Hani and raises questions about who may have had motive beyond the official narrative. It's a view that touches on South Africa's deep inequalities and the tensions around wealth and power at the time. Take a listen.
Now, anyone knowing anything about South Africa will know that it has vast resource and mineral wealth. In fact, learned authors I've consulted reckon that South Africa's resource wealth is greater than any other country in the world, and even way beyond those of Russia. And yet we have the greatest income gap in the world as well. In other words, a measure which is known as the Gini coefficient, which measures the gap between rich and poor in South Africa, is the worst in the world. So it seemed to me that the captains of industry had a good motive to eliminate Chris Hani, because he was planning to redistribute the wealth of the country and move away from this appalling Gini coefficient or income gap. So it seemed to me that the captains of industry had a motive to kill Chris Hani. And what's so interesting is that at the time Janusz Walusz murdered Chris Hani, he was employed by a man called Peter Jackson, who was quite a mysterious businessman. So Janusz Walusz was driving a car owned by Peter Jackson, this captain of industry in South Africa with mysterious connections. And if one looked inside the docket, the police docket for the Hani case, there was an instruction from the security police that Peter Jackson, this captain of industry, was not to be investigated under any circumstances. So if I was investigating who had a motive, I would certainly involve the captains of industry.
And that's Biz News Daybreak for this morning. I'm Asimenyite. Thank you for listening. We'll keep you updated as the day develops. Cheers.
When it comes to savings, we spend a lot of time discussing returns and interest rates, but not enough time asking why we're saving in the first place. That's the thinking behind Investec's #What'sYourWhy campaign that's been running. If your goal is stability or peace of mind, their personal cash investment is accessible from 100,000 Rand, and you don't need to bank with them. Whatever your reason for saving, Investec understands that.